Thanks for coming out, everybody. We know everyone has very busy schedules, and we've been meaning to get this going for quite a while now. And again, thanks for coming out. And first and foremost, we have our American flag there. I'd like to have a pledge of allegiance to the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So again, thanks for coming out. We appreciate it. And first and foremost, I'd like to be crystal clear that this is not a council meeting. This is simply a sponsored educational forum by the LEDC. And you're going to hear many presentations tonight from many of our experts. Many of them have many of years of professional experience and a formal education that specializes with redevelopment, financial analysis, and law. There'll be no questions during the presentation. What we do is we have a hard hat at the end there with index cards. If you have any questions, please feel free to write your questions on the index card and put it in the hard hat. Also, our secretary, Rebecca, just ordered pizza and beverages. We hope to have that here within the hour. And next, I'd like to have an introduction for our panelists here that we have. Sitting at the end is our planner, Paul Rickey.
Hello, everyone.
There's Dan Banker from NW Financial. There's Dan Marinello from also NW Financial. This is Bill Northgrave from McMiniman, Scotland and Bauman. He's our redevelopment attorney. Of course, this is Mayor Derek Armstead, Council President Yamakaitis, Councilman Barry Javik, also a member of the LEDC. And here we have Mike Bono, also the former mayor of Union and the director of our Special Improvement District. And we have Rebecca Kearns-Titoli, the mayor's secretary and the secretary of the LEDC. Next up, I'd like a few words from the mayor.
And there'll be few. Good evening, everybody. Okay. Listen, this is my 6th year as mayor. And but I want to make it perfectly clear that the first 3 years was very difficult. Without having a supporting cast of members on council to try to move things forward, it was very difficult to get things going and get some development jump-started in this town. But after the 3rd year, we picked up some additional support on council, and we were able to start moving things in a direction that we thought was beneficial to the city. So we take pride in the progress of our redevelopment efforts. And we realize that the redevelopment is inevitable. When you have a 35-minute train ride into New York City in a suburb like Linden, redevelopment is inevitable. You have to look at what's happening in other cities along the busiest corridor in the country, which we refer to as the Northeast Corridor. You realize that redevelopment is coming. It's coming to Linden. It's coming to all our neighbors. We're truly blessed to be in the position that we are. Cities like Harrison, Rahway, Metuchen, Elizabeth, Newark, Secaucus, Hoboken, Jersey City, and many others are embracing the current status of the market and the developers' ambitions to provide private investment and to create a more vibrant and bustling downtown areas in all these towns. I would also like to note that according to our Board of Education, since 2010, our school system has increased by the amount of only 246 students. That's for the entire school district, and that's 10 years. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but that's only about 24.6 students every year in 11 schools. That averages about 2 additional students a year in each school. I would also like to keep you in mind that when we go over this presentation, that the state has been providing us with aid, additional state funding over the last 2 to 3 years to our school districts. So much of the development that you see here, it predominantly consists of 1-bedroom units, and we do believe that these developments are not adversely affecting the school district. In fact, we know that they're not affecting the school district. In fact, last night at a council meeting, a gentleman got up, there was an alarm that went off at the Capadaglia building, and he was noted as saying that He saw a bunch of children outside, a lot of kids outside. I just want to know if he wrote their names down and took their addresses, because if there's a fire, if there's some sort of incident, and you see people gathering, it doesn't necessarily mean that they all live in that particular building. We know for a fact that the current development, Capitaglia Meridian 1, does not have a lot of children in it, and it has not adversely affected our school district. So the big fear that these developments are affecting our school district is just that. It's a big fear that does not really, it shouldn't exist because it's not affecting our school system. So with that said, I'm going to let Alex continue with the program. I hope the information that he provides and these gentlemen that we decided to bring here this evening will assist you and help you understand more what the pilot programs are all about, how they're going to affect us economically, and the benefits that they bring to our city. Thank you very much.
A few facts about Linden that you may or may not know about. Obviously, New Jersey is a very densely populated state, the most densely populated state in the nation. And this area, metropolitan area, is the second most densely populated area in the country. Here in Linden, we have very highways and busy roads. Some of the highways include Route 1 and 9, Route 278, the Turnpike, the Parkway borders Linden, obviously Raritan Road, St. George's Ave, Stiles Street, Elizabeth Ave, Linden Ave, and of course right around the corner, Wood Ave. Linden is actually only 13 miles away from Manhattan. I know some of us find that hard to believe because it takes a while to get to Manhattan, but that's because there is a lot of traffic, as I mentioned. It's a very densely populated area. Linden is also only a few miles away from the Newark Airport and a few miles away from the ports of New York and New Jersey, which are the third largest in the country. Some of you may not know, too, Linden is 60% zoned light and heavy industrial, which means Linden has a very good balance in terms of having an industrial base and having a residential base. Also, in 2008, the Planning Board adopted a resolution to adopt a transit-oriented development plan surrounding our train station. Also, according to various sources, Linden is the 9th most diverse municipality in New Jersey out of the 565 municipalities. Now, I want you all to know that this presentation is actually going to provide you real numbers on real projects that we already have in the pipeline or are already finished in Linden. There are several other projects that are in the pipeline. I hope to present them in another forum. One project that I'm very much looking forward to is our project on the corner of West Elizabeth Ave and Northwood Ave. Some of you may know where the Quick Check property is, also the property that the city owns, which is a parking lot, along with the NJ Transit parking lot property. Also, the Quick Check property is formerly known as the Clark property. I'm very proud of what we've done as of recently, and I also look forward to what the future brings here in Linden. We were advised by many other municipalities that we're doing a great job and that we have a great future ahead of us. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bill Northgrave. He's our redevelopment attorney from McMiniman, Scotland and Bauman. Just a little background about Bill. He concentrates in municipal law, specifically in the areas of redevelopment and long-term tax exemption and litigation-related cases. He's worked on a number of redevelopment plans throughout New Jersey on behalf of both public and private entities. He's worked on projects in Woodbridge, Belmar, Linden, West Orange, Tinton Falls, Haddon Township. He just mentioned Woodbridge, Edison, and many others. He currently serves as the general counsel for the Township of Edison, the Middlesex County Utilities Authority, and the Woodbridge Redevelopment Agency. He also received his BA in Curso Classico from St. Peter's College in 1987, and he obtained his JD in 1990 from Seton Hall University School of Law, and he's a registered bar admissions in New Jersey and New York. So, everybody, we'd like to give Bill a little round of applause for taking his time to come out here. He's doing this on a pro bono basis.
Okay, good. Good evening, everyone. Again, I appreciate you coming out. Happy to share some of what we do. I think basically what you're going to find here is I'm going to give you the overview as to how you get there, talk a little bit about how we got certain projects going, and then NW is going to take you through some specific projects and talk about the economic impact that those projects have had here in Linden. Okay. Basically, the redevelopment is it's unique in New Jersey in that it basically puts most of the laws, puts the municipal council and the municipality in charge of what is going to go on. There's a number of laws in New Jersey that limit the ability of municipalities to take action. Redevelopment kind of swipes a lot of those away to give the maximum flexibility to the municipality to cause the redevelopment. And you've seen there's a number of boards here tonight as to just some of the projects that have already happened in Linden, and there are a number of other projects that are in various stages in the pipeline. Some of them are in the process of being built, some of them are built, some of them are at the very beginning stages of discussion. Redevelopment, I'll go quickly through some of these slides. It's the legal process undertaken by the municipality to cause the revitalization, rehabilitation of an area. It's not just, there's a number of criteria that allow you to cause redevelopment to occur. People often think of redevelopment solely as blight, broken windows, torn down buildings, that type of thing. I can give you a concrete example. If any of you are familiar in Roseland, where my office is, there's a office campus that was built 35, 40 years ago. Some of the buildings are completely obsolete, and they cannot be rebuilt in any type of economical fashion. So to bring those buildings down and cause new buildings to come up is going to cause an economic hardship for the developer, and they would not pursue the projects. So redevelopment is one of the criteria. It talks about the obsolescence of a building or a site. So you can have old warehouses that are, without 30-foot heights, when they're, most companies are looking for 45-foot heights now. Those types of things, in addition to broken windows and various problems that occur. The authority for redevelopment is coming through first the New Jersey Constitution, which is also what allows us to get into the pilot program. And then the statute, which is Local Redevelopment and Housing Law, and that, if you care about it, it's NJSA 40A 12A-1. The purpose of redevelopment, I'm sorry, next slide, sorry. I forgot there's slides going on behind me. So the purpose of the redevelopment is to give you enhanced planning, zoning, contract, and financial powers. You can, through redevelopment, the municipality has more control over what is going to happen, when it's going to happen, and how it's going to happen. In a normal planning context, the council develops a zone for an area, establishes the basic bulk requirements, and that's it. Anybody can come in, as long as they're within those bulk requirements, council has very little to do with the project. In the redevelopment context, you can specifically lay out the zoning, lay out the bulk requirements, height, setback, that type of thing. But then there's also going to be a redevelopment agreement. You control when it's going to be built, how quickly it has to be built. Sometimes things like project labor agreements can be incorporated into a redevelopment agreement as appropriate. There's a number of enhanced powers the municipality has through that redevelopment process. We have some examples here of density, height, parking, the contribution of land. We've worked on projects where a developer is going to come to town. They need some additional density to make a project happen, but that will throw off some additional income, but will also throw off some additional needs in a community. So we've done deals where a redeveloper may build a community center, contribute a fire truck, various things that can occur. Most of the projects in redevelopment are usually pretty strapped financially, so it's difficult to get too many major emoluments out of it, but there is always that ability, and the redevelopment law gives you that option to pursue that if and as appropriate. The stakeholders in the redevelopment, So you have the mayor and council. They are technically the redevelopment entity. The planning board, mayor and council will determine that, we should look at block 1, lot 2. Let's see if that satisfies the criteria. Goes over to the planning board. The planning board will review it, make a determination as to whether the criteria have been met. And when sending it over, the town has to declare whether they want to use the powers of condemnation. There's a variety of reasons why that came into being, but basically, if the town says it's non-condemnation, it limits the amount of litigation that can occur. Actually, Linden went through this about 15 years ago. There was a property listed for redevelopment. The current owners, for a variety of reasons, did not want anybody getting on their property, largely because of the major environmental concerns they had. So when the town tried to force them to move along, because the power of condemnation was available, the landowner fought pretty vigorously, and it took a number of years to resolve that litigation. By adding the non-condemnation, it tells the property owner that they don't need to worry about the town taking the property involuntarily, that the town would have to negotiate, or the redeveloper the town designates would have to negotiate with a property owner to acquire property. The redevelopment entity in Linden at least, is the town council. In some places, the redevelopment entity can be a redevelopment agency, an improvement authority, and the state redevelopment agency could also act as the redevelopment entity. The redevelopment entity is the government entity charged with implementing the project, negotiating a redevelopment agreement, and carrying out all the powers that are set forth in an adopted redevelopment plan. And then finally, you have the private developer, someone who's actually bringing equity capital to the table to get a project done. And you have public input, which is always important. If there's a number of issues that can be brought to bear in a redevelopment project, and the public has the opportunity, both in terms of designation of the area, adoption of a plan, and approval of a redevelopment agreement, to comment on the various aspects of it. And through that process, projects do seem to move much more expeditiously. Okay, the process, try to do it this way. The process is, as we discussed, we identify, Paul Rickey will come in and do an investigation and advise whether the criteria have been met. Once that occurs, the planner, in consultation with the redevelopment entity, the town council, the mayor, and council attorneys, prepare and adopt a redevelopment plan. I will then come in and negotiate a redevelopment agreement. Most of the time, in most of the plans that we work on, we recommend the town not only recommend the redevelopment agreement, but it's required. You can't make application to the planning board unless you've already been designated and have signed the redevelopment agreement. Again, it's to be sure that the redeveloper will abide by all the points that the town is interested in achieving. You negotiate a financial agreement, which is the long-term tax exemption, a pilot, which Dan from NW will talk about shortly, and then the project gets built. The project still always has to go to the planning board, so that's not sometimes people think that a redevelopment plan skips the planning board process. It does not. I describe it as a redevelopment plan as a box within which the redeveloper must stay. The planning board determines what is actually going to be built inside that box. And then when a project is complete, there's a certificate of completion is issued. The certificate of completion is important specifically in the condemnation context, because even if there is a condemnation authorized, when a certificate of completion issues, the ability to condemn property evaporates. So if we can go to the next slide, Alex. Okay, I think we just skipped this one, because this is just the actual process that I just described in a flow chart. These are some of the conditions that are involved. The conditions of buildings, the normal blight, discontinued use, abandonment, obsolescence, significant vacancies, publicly owned land that hasn't been developed, areas with improvements that are detrimental to safety, dilapidation, obsolescence, lack of proper utilization. That's where you have a series of small properties by individual owners that have all become dilapidated, but you can't, nobody's gonna come in and do it, do any rebuilding of the project because there are just individual pieces. It's too hard to acquire. Everyone knows the story of trying to build a casino in Atlantic City where the one homeowner held out, trying to cash out on the deal, and ultimately they built around that owner. But this allows you to pick that parcel up if it meets the criteria. I think we have to go on to the next page for the balance of them. There's only, yeah, this is basically natural disaster is F. Actually, we used this in Belmar after Hurricane Sandy, but the court found that there, because it was mostly public property that got destroyed, there was no economic impact, and they rescinded the designation. G and H I have some concerns about using them aggressively, standing alone, but they are urban enterprise zones, and H is if the state government has designated as a smart growth area. I'm not sure that it meets constitutional muster, but we don't usually have to confront that. And the last one is probably a 21st century issue. It's a fairly new change to the statute. Shopping malls. We all see what's happening with retail. It's much easier to sit on your couch and order with your computer than to get in the car and drive to Menlo Mall, Woodbridge Center, or what have you. There are a lot of the shopping, I see it in my practice, a lot of the shopping malls are coming, wanting to do different things. Kushner's, I think, bought, it's in Eatontown, I forget the name of the mall, but basically going to put some housing on the mall as well. So I think you're going to be seeing more and more of that. The problems in retail are causing that issue. And I think you have some strip malls here in town that as we continue through the process may require a look at to see if they can be helped with the redevelopment designation. Rehab area, I don't know that we need to go through it in any great depth, but basically there are several criteria here. Rehabilitation basically means your infrastructure is old. There's a couple other criteria that would be the engineer would certify to that. The council would draft a resolution, send it over to the planning board for its review, and the council would just adopt that resolution. Rehabilitation gives you the same powers as redevelopment, except it does not allow for a financial agreement, a pilot, and does not allow for condemnation. So it's useful in some areas. A number of towns, a number of my clients have designated the entire town as an area in need of rehab. One of the things you can do is what's called the scattered site redevelopment plan, where you can declare the entire town, and then where you have small pockets that you might not otherwise want to go for full-blown redevelopment investigation, you can do it and redevelop those as you see fit. Okay, those are the criteria. I don't think there's any need to continue to go through those. I'm not sure if Paul is going to be talking about any of this, but you can have an overlay zone or superseding. So if you want to designate an area and a property owner is concerned that they're going to lose their zoning, you can do it as an overlay zone instead of superseding. And that would leave the underlying zoning. If somebody wanted to develop under underlying zoning, they could develop in the normal process, or they could use the redevelopment law, which would require the redevelopment plan, that would require the redevelopment process. It's effective in certain situations. Generally, the process, at least the way I recommend it, is for the municipality. The town council is really the policy-making body. Although the planning board has the opportunity to draft a plan and send it over to the town council, my recommendation is usually the elected officials are the ones who should be making the policy decisions and referring that over to the planning board for their review, and that's where their expertise comes in, because there may be things that the planning board members who have a greater expertise in land use can assist once the town council has hit the higher policy points in a plan. If the planning board recommends a change to a plan, then it would require the town can either accept those changes or can reject it, but if they reject it, they need to create a record for that. And a plan is ultimately adopted by an ordinance, so there's always going to be a public hearing. It's been an introduction and a hearing. Thanks. The next, after the adopt a once you negotiate a redevelopment agreement, a lot of projects require, so at the redevelopment agreement, basically, there are certain statutory provisions that have to be hit, but it also sets forth timeframes, what the municipality will need to do, what the redeveloper will need to do. In a normal planning board situation, it's very limited what off-site requirements you can make on a developer in a redevelopment context. If you believe that there's off-site conditions that need to be addressed, you can include them as part of the redevelopment agreement. As long as they're related to the redevelopment project, those can be enforced. Next slide. Okay, so once you have the redevelopment agreement, you would, if necessary, as part of the process, you'd be discussing whether a pilot was appropriate. And if a pilot is appropriate, what are the criteria that need to go into it? There's a statutory floors for pilots. They can't be less than 10% of annual gross revenue, can't be less than 2% of total project cost, and it can't be less than what the existing taxes before the pilot comes into play is. In many situations, projects cannot support full taxation, but they can support something more than 10%. And this town uses NW Financial. They review that. Excuse me. Dan will go through some of that, but the high point is they'll review, determine what percentage of gross revenue can the project support so as to maximize both the revenue to the town while still causing a project to be built. People often say, well, what would the project throw off if it was regularly taxed? What it would throw off regularly taxed is what it produces today, because not all projects that require a financial agreement will not get built without a financial agreement. So you can have the status quo. If you want to make the change, then you go into redevelopment and you look at financial agreements. Once the agreements are signed, designation occurs, then it's the normal development process. Planning board approval, permits, county, state, federal, what have you, that are needed, construction, and then once the construction is complete, CO, and then once the CO is issued, then the town would review and make sure not only did all the certificate of occupancy requirements get met, but all of the other issues in a redevelopment agreement. So if there was an off-site condition, that needs to be met before they get a completion of construction, certificate of completion, which signals the end of the project. This is the other area where, in this day and age with the COA requirements, the Mount Laurel, whatever you call it, redevelopment is a serious tool to be used. The biggest problem, people talk about affordable housing can't be built. Affordable housing can't be built because the economics often are destroyed by the provision, by complying with some of the affordable housing requirements. And that is where redevelopment will come in handy. You can increase density, which will increase the financial impacts of the project. And you can also use financial agreements, which are very useful for helping a developer achieve the goal. If the town has a goal of making sure that you're getting 15-20% of each housing project to have affordable housing components, you want to be sure that people actually build those projects, and they're not going to build it if they can't make a reasonable return on their investment. So that's where both the density through the redevelopment process and the financing that you can achieve through the financial agreements comes into play. Let me just take you quickly through this. The annual service charge is what I discussed a moment ago. It is a charge on the improvements. It's not on the land. The land is paid separately. You can remove the annual service. You can, remove land taxes where housing is involved. And again, it's still an open area of the law as to whether that would hold up if in fact challenged. Go to the next slide. The process, and again, this is where we work with NW and advise the city here in Linden, is a but-for test, and basically that here's what conventional taxes look like, and if it were conventionally taxed, the return on investment is, 2%, something less than you would get if you put your money in a savings account. And so no developer is going to take that risk, because regardless of, there's tremendous rewards in real estate, but there's also tremendous risks. So there has to be a decent return on investment, or they won't build, and that is basically the but-for test. The long-term tax exemption law is recognized in the state constitution, and the state constitution basically addresses the fact that all property must be taxed, taxes that are imposed must be imposed equally on like units. So the idea of an annual service charge or a pilot is an exception to that, and the Constitution recognizes that where it is needed to end blight or to cause redevelopment, then that is a constitutionally accepted method, and that's how the long-term tax exemptions are available. Urban renewal entity is basically just a statutorily created, the only entity that can get a tax exemption is an urban renewal entity. It is formed through the state of New Jersey. There's certain audit requirements. They have to show what their profits are. Their profits are going to be limited under statute. And so, again, just a statutory requirement. Whenever you see a financial agreement, you will always hear the name urban renewal will appear in every name, and that, again, is statutory. Profits are capped at 12%, and then I don't want to get too deep in the weeds as to how that is calculated. If there are excess profits above the 12%, and there's a lot of exclusions to that, then they're also paid as an additional charge to the municipality. There cannot be a tax appeal while there is a annual service charge or long-term tax exemption in place. They can opt out of the long-term tax exemption at their option after the first year, and that there's one exception to that, and that would be in the redevelopment area bond context, where the pilot would support a loan that would be taken out to further development, and that's the only time they cannot opt out. But when they opt out, then they just pay conventional taxes. So, for the reasons discussed earlier, they wouldn't be doing that because they wouldn't be building the project if they didn't get the tax exemption in the first place. We need to go through this too much. It's basically, they make an application. The application includes the draft financial agreement. That gets presented to the council. That has all the financial figures. It has the analysis done by NW. It has the actual financial agreement itself, which, among other things, sets forth the annual service charge will be paid, the formula that will be paid. While the 2% of total project cost is allowed, most projects, hotels are a limited exception to it. Most projects are better computed under a annual gross revenue than a total project cost basis. Okay, the mayor reviews the application. The mayor would be involved in the negotiation, would be involved in the, what they're saying, the analysis of the pro forma that would be provided by a developer. And once we get it to where the mayor thinks it is a worthwhile, then he will write a letter to the council recommending the adoption of the financial agreement. And then again, that is by ordinance. So it would be introduced, and then a public hearing would be held as to the particulars of the financial agreement, and that would be done by council. The financial, again, it's just the basic terms of the financial agreement, what the annual service charge would be, the limitation of profits, which is statutory. It would recognize that the improvements would be exempt from regular taxation. They would only pay the annual service charge in lieu of taxation. And the URE is required to annually submit an audit from their accountant showing what their actual revenue is. So there is no ability to say, well, we only made 50 cents last year, so here's your nickel. They have to show exactly what they took in And that would include all revenue. It's not just rents. It would include if you're paying for parking, that would go into it. If you're paying for laundry service, that would go into it as well. And that's, the town gets to look at that every year. In most of the agreements we do, we build in an annual administrative fee, which is 2% of the actual pilot. The purpose behind that is to create a small fund so that the town can use its auditors to review those audits and just, make sure that the numbers make sense. Okay, so we've gone through how you compute it. 95% of the annual service charge is retained by the municipality, and the other 5% goes to the county. The maximum term for financial agreement is 30 years from the beginning of the project, but there's been a recent change to state law that where there are 2 or more phases, the maximum period can be 50 years, but it's only an effective period of 30 years. So if a project takes 10 years to come online, there would still be a full 30-year period of exemption. Sometimes on larger projects, it could take 5 to 10 years or even longer to build the whole thing out. So this just makes sure that projects were getting limited because they couldn't do the long-term tax exemption for a period of time that really reflected the whole life of the project. I'll leave this to Dan. This is what NW Financial does, is reviews all the various costs, the cost of money, the cost of land, that type of thing, but we'll leave someone who's much more competent at it than I am to explain that. Discussed this earlier. Term is earlier 30 years or 35 from execution. So there is a built-in 5-year period. If there's several phases, there's a built-in additional 20-year period if needed. And there is the 20, 40, 60, 80 you see towards the bottom of this is a look back. So the law requires that at certain points during the financial agreement, you do look back to conventional taxes. So if a project for some reason is grossly undervalued, the annual service charge does not come near what the regular taxes would be, then when that look back is performed and if the look back is lower, then you would, instead of paying the annual service charge, you would pay 60%, depending upon where it falls in the contract. Again, the minimum annual service charge is what the property paid prior to being completed. Go to the next slide. Again, the administrative fee, just to create a small, if you have a $100,000 pilot, you have a $2,000 administrative fee, and it's enough for your professionals to review what the order is. I mean, you can use it for any municipal purpose, but that's usually what I see it used for. Once the financial agreement expires, then it's back to conventional taxes for then the life of whatever the agreement lasts. Okay, next slide. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, again, the idea behind why you would do an annual service charge is the project has to work financially. Project doesn't work, nobody's going to build a project that they're going to lose money on. Nobody's going to build a project that they're going to put a lot of money at risk for to get a nominal return on their investment. So that is the whole purpose of the annual service charge. It allows the municipality to attract those projects. So you have a number of properties here in town had some serious environmental challenges. People were staying away from them because they couldn't afford them. There was no way to make the economics work. The financial agreements make the economics work and allow a town to take what has become property that's laying fallow in some cases, for decades, and turn it into something that is very valuable. It produces revenue, but also adds to the value of the town. It starts, bring people into town, and eliminating the environmental hazards alone sometimes is sufficient return. But it also helps the town make sure projects work, so you can meet things like the affordable housing issues that we discussed earlier. And that's all I have. So I think what we have is, Alex has got it set up that we will take questions, I think, after the presentations. So. All right, thank you, sir.
Can we all give Bill a round of a hand? He came here as a volunteer, pro bono, to help us out with this. So, I'm not gonna lie, that was the really hard part. That was obviously the legal part in terms of, how redevelopment starts from start to essentially the end process of how to get a redevelopment plan going. Our next session is gonna pretty much deal with the financial part of redevelopment and the part that most of us like to see, which is the increased revenues that are going to come to the city with redevelopment. Our next guest and professional is Dan Marinello, the president of NW Financial. Dan has actually been the president of NW since 1997. He's provided the firm with his public finance and management experience and expertise over those 23 years. He acts as the senior and lead advisor to many of the firm's major clients and has structured a variety of innovative transactions, some of which have set precedents in the industry. In 2005, he became the president of the firm and has taken control of the responsibilities of coordinating the firm's various business lines and organizational structures. He has served as the advisor for several governmental entities, including the City of Newark, Passaic County Improvement Authority, Bergen County Improvement Authority, and of course the City of Linden. Additionally, he has led various consulting projects on behalf of his advisory firm, including asset sales and lease programs, public-private partnerships, the creation of public authorities, and cash flow analysis for rate-based utilities. He also has spoken at various conferences, including the Jersey Affordable Housing Management Association, and also he spoke at the Value of Bond Ratings 2010 panel with various industry professionals at the State League of Municipalities seminar. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dan Marinello. And also the pizza's coming, everybody. Please be patient.
Yeah, it does. Just you're not going to be able to see the screen.
Thank you, Alex, for that introduction. I forgot how long I've been in this business. Thank you for the reminder. Everyone okay out there? Did Bill put you to sleep? Because he does that sometimes. We're all now officially redevelopment councils, thanks to Bill. Before we could put the slides up, which is fine. One of the things I just want to generally talk about is, our firm has been doing this for a long time, and one of the things that, I think we feel very proudly about is we represent government entities. We represent taxpayers. We don't represent developers. We work on behalf of the people, and it's our job to make sure that, that whatever is the ultimate goal, whatever is the ultimate result of these developments is for the best benefit of the town and the city and the people. I talk about redevelopment projects as like a partnership because that's really what they become. One of the slides that Bill had up there says, in the law, it requires there's to be what's called a but-for clause. And we talk about that all the time because people always want to say, well, what would we have been getting if this project was paying conventional taxes? And the truth of the matter is you would get zero because the projects would not be built. A lot of people try to fight us on that, but the truth is they wouldn't. As you'll start to see in some of the numbers that we're talking about here, developers are investing significant amount of dollars into Linden and into other communities in New Jersey, and they're looking for a return on that investment. We do the analysis that shows if we were the developer in this project and we were investing the money and we had to pay conventional taxes based on what the ultimate assessment would it be worth our while? Would we be making a return on our money? In some of these projects, you're talking about an investor, just equity alone, of $25, $30 million. If you were investing $30 million, you would be looking for a return on your money. And one of the first things that we do is we run the cash flow analysis and we check to see if we were to pay conventional taxes for this project, what would our returns be? And in many cases, the returns are negative. It's an unfortunate situation, but the tax rates in New Jersey are not low, right? So what we look at is it's a real balance between what can a developer receive once it's built in rents. Where do the rents, where are they on the spectrum? Are they high? Are they low? What does it cost today to build in North Jersey? And then what the ultimate returns are. In Linden, just to give you an example, one of the cities that's not far from here, obviously, Jersey City, they've started to no longer give financial agreements and pilots to market rate developments. And part of the reason for that is they're receiving rents in excess of $4 a square foot. So if you're thinking about what the size of a regular apartment might be, that's a really high rent. New York City is at $4 or $5, $6 a square foot. In Linden, we're talking about rents around $2.30 a square foot, $2.50 a square foot. So when you balance that off a tax rate that we have here in Linden, about 3.1, which is not dissimilar than a lot of other communities in North Jersey, the revenues from a rental project are not there such that you can get any return for your dollar if you're an investor trying to build. So that's where the financial agreement comes in. That's where the pilot comes in. And it's not an abatement. It's not paying zero taxes. They still are paying a significant amount of money. But the question is how do you find that balance between what they can pay and what they can still make as a return in their investment? Because obviously, we talked about projects that have been undeveloped for years, somewhat significant environmental concerns, and this pilot is a way to actually spur that development. If anyone has been up by the George Washington Bridge, there's two enormous towers that have gone up over the last 6 years that on property right by the George Washington Bridge in Fort Lee that was empty for 60 years, just sat there with nothing. And now there are two 40-story towers on there. And part of that investment was as a result of the ability, the tool that the long-term tax exemption law allows for us to use. So that's just a general discussion on sort of how we look at this. And it's important because it's one of the only tools that municipalities have in New Jersey to help spur investment. It's not a sales tax thing. Property taxes are what we deal with, and they are what they are. And if we want to actually spur investment into our communities, this is one of the few tools that we have. And the tool's being used all over the state. I mean, North Jersey especially, because it's very expensive to build. And in some communities where you don't have a lot of investment yet, you still don't have the rents that you want to see. So once that starts to happen, the idea of the law was to spur redevelopment, and eventually where you get a much broader investment into your community, you'll start to see rents go up, and you'll start to see, just like Jersey City, where the use of pilots has started to go down. So I don't know, we can start the slides now. Go to the next page there. So just to talk a little bit about Linden, and these are 9 projects that we've been working on and have either, I think all of them have been completed with regards to a financial agreement, but not all of them have been completed with regards to construction. But just to give you an example, just these 9 projects is over $865 million of investment in the city of Linden. I mean, that's incredible. That's just in the last 5 years, right? So, I mean, just to think about, without the tool of a long-term tax exemption law, the pilot, that wouldn't have happened. So you're really starting to see an incredible investment here in Linden. And I don't know if you want to go through some of these, Alex, these posters, but maybe we'll turn the light back on for a second. We put some renderings together and some charts just to give you an idea of what these projects were bringing in at those properties if they were just stay the same over the next 30 years versus what you have now. This first one is, you saw the two Meridia buildings. This is Meridia 2, which hasn't been completed yet. It's under construction. Can you raise it up a little bit? So this is Meridia 2. So this is a project that if it had stayed the same as it was, would have brought in $1.4 million over the next 30 years. As a result of the development, we're talking about $15.8 million. And that's Meridia 2. Meridia 1's not here, but Meridia 1 is about the same with regards to the site. So that, I mean, that's just to give you an example. But we can use this next one here. The next one over here to the left is DC Hospitality and Storage. This is long-term, this is a hotel, extended stay hotel, and a storage facility. That property over the next 30 years would have brought in $1.2 million, and now at $14 million. Thank you, Dan. And these have been, and these were deals that where the developers came in originally, they were asking for a lot less. And I'm going to go through a little bit about what the percentages of gross revenues that Bill was referring to, but this one is City Village, right? I don't know, I can't see the numbers on it, Alex.
Oh, sorry.
That's again about $1 million over 30 years, now going to be close to $12 million. So again, just incredible investment into this city. You know, if you want to just leave them up and people can walk around, and or you want to keep going through a little bit?
We'll go through them right now just to get it out of the way while we in the process.
This is another project that is, this is 1001 West Elizabeth Avenue, sometimes referred to as United Lacquer,
Yes.
right? This was $508,000 if left alone.
Let me interrupt you, Jan.
Yeah, sure.
We actually haven't received one nickel in taxes from this property since 1990.
Yeah.
Not one nickel. The city actually sold the property to the developer for $1 million. Sorry.
Correct, and now we'll receive almost $31 million. And these are conservative estimates. If you remember, we talked about percentages of gross revenues. So the whole idea of spurring development is we base the pilot on a percentage of the revenue that's coming in. So as the developer, some people will say, well, what if the rents go really high and the developer really kills it? Well, you know what, great, because then so do we. Because we get a percentage of everything that he brings in. We get a percentage of that. It becomes a true partnership with the developer. So you want them to exceed. Them succeeding is more money for the city and then more investment in and around these projects that we're laying empty before this. This is a logistics center. This was potentially bringing in $57 million over the next 30 years and now almost $200 million. I mean, that's as good as you can get with regards to redevelopment of a project that did not have any investment in it for years.
Does everybody know where that property is located? Alex?
That's the former ISP DuPont property. That's where the warehousing is coming from Advanced Creek, right over the turnpike. You go down Wood Ave, and it's on the left-hand side. You'll see they're building a bridge there.
Actually, the next slide has a map of where all these
Yeah, we'll
properties
have
are,
the
so we'll
next
show it out there. I don't see what
This
this
is
one
on West Elizabeth Ave, right where JTG Scaffolding was, right next to the NJ Transit parking lot.
Yeah, now this is an increase of $23 million over the next 30 years. And this isn't all of the projects. I think this was 6 or 7 of them. So I think, and I do have this number here. I think the gross payments, just to give you an idea, of the 9 projects we've worked on, the gross payments from developers, now they're pilots, they're not as taxes, right? They're pilots, it's still payments into the city, is over $420 million over 30 years. $420 million. Now the difference in how that gets split up is varying between what the county gets and what the school gets, and we can talk a little bit about that. But that's a net of about $325 million to the city of Linden, just to the city. Significant dollars. And as I mentioned before, one of the things about square footages, and you can make this decision on your own just by looking at it. I think the average, we talked a little bit about school students at some point. I think the average 1 bedroom in some of these units is about 700 square feet. So the way that developers are building today, and if you walk into any of the Meridia buildings or some of the other ones around the train station, these are not built for families raising children to go into the school systems. They're built for young people, they're built for families that now the children are gone and the parents are working and commuting into the city and they no longer want to be in a house. And those facts are, it's actually playing out that way. The studies that are shown from Rutgers and whatnot are showing such a small amount of school students coming out of these projects. In case that's always been a big issue. When we go through some of these numbers, you can put the next slide on there. So you can see the next page is a map. Before that, I think actually I showed about over 1,000 new units coming into Linden as these residential projects get built. This is the logistics center here you were talking about, Alex, right? This is a 4-phase warehouse distribution center. And you can see it's all over. It's both at the train station, it's up there, and the City Village is the furthest one from downtown, but it's a real big investment into the city of Linden. The next page, I have a couple of the 9 of the projects that we worked on, just a couple of the general facts and summaries of the projects in case you don't know, and I'll go through a little bit. This is Meridian 1. This is the one that's built. About $17.7 million when we first looked at it. Actually, I think came in more than that when they were finished. 176 units. And if you look here, this is what we were talking about with regards to the percentages of revenue. So 30-year pilot, 12.84% of the gross revenues that the developer receives comes to the city as a pilot payment. And then the phase-in of conventional taxes, as we talked about. As you get to the end of the 30 years, it starts to switch from a percentage of gross revenue to a percentage of conventional taxes. So by year 26, you'll start paying 80% of conventional taxes, and then when you get to year 30, you pay 100%. At 31, you pay 100% of conventional taxes. Meridian 2, this is the same one. Again, this is just an example, and I do this for each one of the projects to show you how the analysis is done. You pay a percentage of gross revenues, the 12.84, or a percentage of otherwise applicable taxes. That's what the OAT stands for. And you get your gross pilot. You take out the county share, and in this case, the rest of it goes to the city. Just to give you an idea, in this particular one, the city share was $42,000 before development and $455,000 at stabilization. Significant increases just in this one project. And I think when you do all of these projects, these 9 projects on an annual basis, the city's going to be receiving over $5.5, almost $6 million in new pilot revenue at stabilization when all of these are completed. That's 10% of what's raised in your local budget through your taxes. That's a significant, I'm not sure I've seen as significant an investment in a city than we're starting to see here in Linden. This is Meridian 2. This is the one that's in the middle of being completed this year. Another 145 market rate units, again, 12.84% of gross revenue. Those 2 projects were completed in a financial agreement at the same time, which is why they have the same percentage of revenue. Remember, the developers, like the law allows it to be the minimum of 10% of gross revenues. So the developers, when they start to come to your city, especially in the beginning, they like to look at doing the minimum. And that's one of the things that we go back and forth with developers on. They want to start at the lowest point, and we start to push them up until we feel that both the city is getting what they deserve and the developers are getting a return on their money. Obviously, I mentioned before, we want them to be invested in the community. We want them to make money. Go ahead, Alice. You'll see this box up on the right-hand side on every one of these slides, which says the project would not have been built if conventional taxes were required. I just like to remind people of that because everyone always just reminds me, well, why don't we just pay conventional taxes? And as I mentioned before, nobody would have invested the dollars that they're investing if they had to pay at the regular tax level, which is why the law was put in place anyway. This is a $309,000 increase from what the city was getting before development to today. Yeah, this is the United Lacquer project. This one here is actually, you can see, we had $1 million payment for the property, right, Alex? That was the upfront payment. And then the 30-year pilot was negotiated, instead of 12.84, this one was 11%, 12%, 13.5%. And you see that a lot, because as, you know, where the developers like to try and get the most out of their money is in the first 10 years. So we try to work in perhaps a phasing in of an increase in the gross revenue percentage. Go ahead, Alex. This one is a little bit bigger, you can see here, and that's because in this particular case, there is land taxes to be paid, which means in this particular case, it's 11%. You get a gross pilot, and then the developer also, in that gross pilot, pays their land taxes. Land taxes get split as they normally do. County, school, I think the school is 50%? About 50%, and the city's about 33%. So then the city gets their share of the land tax credit.
So Dan, can you just clarify to the residents that what you just said again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. So if the gross pilot is in year 8, you could see $1 million. The developer still has to pay his land taxes, and it comes out of that $1 million. So the land tax credit in this particular case in year 8 would be $316,000. 50% of that would go to the school, 33% to the city, the rest to the county. And that happens every year on this project. And actually, I think that's the case in every one of the projects here in Linden, except for the first two, the Meridia 1 and Meridia 2, being the first ones in here. I think at the time, I'm trying to remember back to that time, that it was important to try and get as much out of that project as we could to the city. But as we've gone on,
The market's increased.
yeah, the ability to be able to keep the land taxes in there and share a portion of this with the school and the county has become easier to do in these projects. So in this particular one, this United Lacquer, you're talking about basically nothing to, you know, over $675,000 annually.
Again, we haven't received taxes on lacquer since 1990.
1990. Thank you for reminding me. This is the hotel and storage facility. The hotel one, this is, Bill had mentioned before, I know we're probably giving you way too much information than you really need, but the law allows you to also base your pilot on 2% of construction cost. So for the hotel, that's how that was based for the pilot. Hotels are run differently, so doing it just on gross revenues was a little bit more, it was too much of an impact to the project for the developer. The 2% of total project cost makes sense. However, we did throw a little kicker in there, as you can see. If the hotel does really well, then we start sharing in a percentage of the revenues above $3 million, and then 20% of revenues above $3.2 million. And that was because it was still unclear at the time as to where the hotel rates were really going to go. So we protected ourselves in the city by adding that in there in case they do really well. But at the worst case scenario, we put the minimum of 2% of construction costs. The storage facility, you can see again a phase-in of the 30 years, 10.5, 11, 12, 13. And these are percentages you'll see all the time. It ends up being right around there in most projects. It's just sort of how the dollars are coming out. 73,000 square feet of storage facility. Go ahead, Alex. Again, a lot to take in, but again, this is the gross pilot. You take out the land taxes. The city gets a share of those land taxes, as you can see. Then the county gets a share of the pilot. You'll see this 2% admin fee. The basis for that, by the way, is every year the city's staff and perhaps professionals, depending on the complexity of it, are going to have to review the audits from every one of these projects. So it's not as if this is guesswork. They have to have an audit by a third party, an independent third party that will be submitted to the city. The city will review that audit, and it'll be based, that when we talk about percentages of revenues, it's based on that independent third-party audit. So everything is checked, and if in case one year was low, then a credit goes to the next year. So there's always a check and balance on what these dollars are. Go ahead, Alex. This is the same thing for the storage, so just put both of them together. The storage was the percentage of revenue. Again, land tax credits, county share comes out. The county share, after you take out the land tax credit, the law requires the county to get 5% of the pilot. So that's why you'll always see a share to the county here. City Village, actually ended up a little over 27 million, 10, 11 and a half, 13, and now 15%. So you're starting to see more and more where the city is in the position, not because we're so great negotiators, although we do a pretty good job, but the markets start to change. And so as you start to see investors developing in your city, and you'll start to see new developers and new people wanting to come in and invest their money, as rents start to go up, more of a percentage of the revenues can come to the city as far as a pilot's concerned.
And Dan, can you just advise the constituents in terms of, in all of these agreements, isn't there something in there indicating that they need to remediate the property as well, for the most part?
Well, I mean, they all will remediate the property. I mean, it's the first thing that they do. I mean, you got to remember, when they all get construction loans, right? So, but the construction loans don't come in until after they've already put out a significant amount of dollars to remediate the property that's there, so to get it ready to be built. I mean, I'm not sure, I haven't seen one that didn't get started and built, but you will end up with a piece of property that is now developable and ready to go. The City Village one, again, the same chart, and this is the analysis we do all the time. And, 32,000 pre-development, $235,000 at stabilization. Just consistently seeing incredible increases in, I call it tax revenue, it's pilot revenue, but it is taxes. I mean, don't forget, this is their version of their taxes. Go ahead, Alex. This is the Linden Station project, 234 market rate residential units, 4,300 retail space, 11, 13, and 15% of gross revenues. Again, this was a really good project for the city. This was almost $70 million of an investment here for this project. Big numbers. Go ahead, Alex. This is over $450,000 a year in additional revenue to the city than what was being received prior to this project being completed. Again, big numbers. Go ahead, Alex. This is Linden Logistics. You can see it right on the river. This is the one where the bridge is being built, not completed yet.
It's just about completed.
Right, and as soon as that gets completed, I believe you'll start to see the construction of the first phase of this project.
At the end of this year, we'll have the 8 buildings completed.
Right, and you can see the 10.5, 12.5, and 14.5% of revenues, $4 million of square footage of warehouse distribution, over $623 million. It's hard to find that kind of investment in many places around here. Go ahead, Alex. The numbers that come in off of this project alone, remember, one of the nice things about this project is, as you could probably imagine, no school kids coming out of here, right? I mean, minimal cost on an annual basis to the city.
This is projected to be the largest industrial development in the New York, New Jersey metro area and the largest warehousing district in the Northeast when it's completed.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about, when this gets completed, it was hard to do this one because it's all phases and they're all going to come in at different times over the next 5 years or so. But you're talking about $4+ million a year just in this project alone, with almost zero impact to your cost, your budgetary cost in the city and to the schools.
What's the timeframe when that would be completed?
Well, the first phase of that is to start this year, right?
Yeah, it's a
Four phases.
2 buildings a year. The end of 2023, it's projected to be complete.
Right. This is the 1700 South Styles, 27 market rate residential units, 11, 13, 15% on the pilot. So you see, various different sizes of projects being done, from the 4 million of square footage of warehouse to 234 units of residential to smaller 27 market rate residential units. The numbers aren't as grand as the previous one, but they're just as important because every dollar counts. City share at stabilization, you're talking about over $40,000. Trying to think if there was, is that the last one, Alex?
Yeah, that's it.
No, I'm not sure well, I know the pizza's here, so that's good, I'm not sure if you heard my stomach rumbling over the microphone.
All right.
But thank you.
I have a question here. I'm going to have to defer this to Bill, I believe. The question is, how strong is the role of the planning board? If they say no to a project, but the city goes ahead with their plan, doesn't that defeat the purpose of having citizens' representation involved in city planning?
Yeah, the short answer is it does, but that's exactly what happens in regular zoning anyway. If the city adopts a zone for a project, put redevelopment plans aside, if the city adopts a zone and says you can build a nuclear power plant, then the planning board doesn't have the right to say you can't build a nuclear power plant. That's a decision made by the elected officials as to what fits in each area. So the planning board, their function doesn't change or isn't diminished because of an adoption of a redevelopment plan. They have the same exact role as they have in normal zoning.
Thank you, Bill. All right, I have another question here. How will increased traffic be handled? And I think this is a question that we have 2 engineers that are also on our planning board can answer if they want to approach. How will traffic be handled? And as advised previously, many of these developers do have to come to the planning board for certain site plan approvals. Bill, I don't know if you want to take another poke at this one as well.
Yeah, again, it'd be the same, it's the same function for the planning board. A project will be presented to the planning board. If there are conditions that need to be addressed, they would be addressed. Some of them are larger issues than one particular site. I think the best example is, I don't know if it's still up here, but the Linden Logistics Center. It's a pretty significant project, but what the mayor and others have been working on for a long time now is getting that turnpike extension built in. Once that's done, it changes the whole profile of the traffic issue. But the traffic, if a project is coming in, a traffic study where warranted would be asked for by the planning board, and the developer would produce it and show what the issues were, and then how you would fix those issues or ameliorate the impact on the residents.
And then the second part of the question was what tax benefit will these bring to the taxpayer? And I think these renderings speak for themselves, as we just provided. The next question, each 50 by 100 acre produces, each 50, well, it says acre, okay. Each 50 by 100 foot produces 3,100 gallons of water. How do these projects plan to handle this flow?
And what inch of rain?
And again, this is more of an engineering question. I don't know
It's the same thing. The planning board has to deal with that. So if there's water flow, it's got to be addressed. You can't build impervious surfaces and allow water to just flow into the street. There's got to be stormwater management, all those, the same issues you would have everywhere else. The way to deal with that, if the choice is that you do not want that type of, if you don't want to deal with it through a stormwater analysis, is don't build. And that's a policy issue that the elected officials are going to make. They're going to say, yes, we want development, we want investment, we want, what I hear developers say all the time is you give me heartbeats, I can give you retail. When you have all these, especially the ones around the train station, you're adding a lot of residents. So all your retail on Wood Avenue and some of the other places is going to explode. I live in Bayonne, I see the same thing going on there. We have a lot of residential going up, and I see the retailers really starting to grin pretty broadly. But again, if you don't want it, then the message to send to your elected officials is, we don't want that here. We want to keep grassy fields, and that's the other way to deal with stormwater management.
And my next question is, NJ Transit during peak hours are operating at or beyond capacity with no relief in sight. Is it responsible to add more people to an already burdened system? That's more of an NJ Transit question, but
But I think the answer is the same as the stormwater question. I know transit's encouraging people to come out, and it's the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. They can, the more people, using the same service, granted, they're having their struggles right now, but that's got a lot to do with a whole lot of issues having really little to do with the development, a lot to do with management. But again, it's a policy decision. Do you want to have Elizabeth or Rahway, create all that development, create all those opportunities, and Linden sit by idly because you're afraid that New Jersey Transit's not going to be able to handle the flow? Again, it's a policy decision. The elected officials will make that decision, and you have the chance to say you agree with their decision in a voting booth, and that's if they're moving the community forward, that's a decision they've made, and that's the beauty of elections.
yeah, we've had several meetings with NJ Transit over the last couple of months. They seem very proactive to work with the city of Linden. As I mentioned previously in council meetings, we've already had discussions with potentially getting a parking garage at the property they own on West Elizabeth Ave. And as you may know, yesterday, the ordinance was approved for first reading for the redevelopment plan, which includes that property. So, and then the last question, it's pretty much a rhetorical question that was asked. It was in reference to traffic on St. George's Ave, and as Bill mentioned, our planning board has to review these projects for site plan approval. They have traffic engineers that come and they give us their professional opinions in reference to the traffic. And again, it's just as Bill provided, the planning board would essentially have to review these plans, and then if need be, if it seems to be a big issue, the state of New Jersey, because St. George is a state road, it would have to actually provide some input as well in some cases. And I see Nick's shaking his head because he's had a lot of experience with the state as well, as has Armin, as a former county engineer. So yeah, that's something that is, of course, taken a look at.
My question was two-part.
Sure.
I didn't see the gentleman give any redevelopment, the revenue that would come from the developments that's taking place on St. George Avenue.
Yeah.
The breakdown of which one was it? Is there a display here? I don't see a display.
Where's
For St.
there it
George
is.
Avenue.
City Village.
Okay, it's entitled what?
City Village.
Oh, City Village.
So again, if this property was not developed, the city would only receive $1 million in revenue over a 30-year term. If the property is going to be developed, which it is in the process of, the city's going to receive an additional $10.9 million over a 30-year term.